I'm Peter Burt. I'm a researcher with Drone Wars UK. We look into the use of armed drones in military conflict, and recently we've been looking at the way in which drones are becoming increasingly automated and with the use of artificial intelligence technology are becoming basically flying killer robots. So I think at the moment we're at quite an important position regarding the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems, as you say, known as killer robots. Um, there's a lot of work underway in the United Kingdom, funded by the Ministry of Defence and big arms companies, to try to develop automated technology for military weapon systems. And this is increasingly taking us down the line towards a weapon that's able to make its own decisions. And that raises a lot of big ethical issues. There are questions about the reliability of the system, about its ability to sort of discern between civilians and military competence. But the biggest ethical issue of all, I think, is the issue about whether it can ever be morally right to develop a machine that can kill humans with no human intervention whatsoever. Can that really ever be right? The Campaign to Stop Killer Robots is a network of civil society organisations who share our concerns about the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems. And it's an international campaign. It brings together some of the very big non-government organisations working on human rights issues like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, United Nations Association, and as well as that there are more specialist groups like ourselves, Drone Wars UK. And the campaign is working to try to secure an international ban on the development and the use of killer robots. And to do that, it's working with sympathetic governments, of which there are many, and also working with, in some cases, military experts and experts from the tech development sector, software engineers, again, many of whom are very concerned about the direction that this technology is leading us in. Well, COVID-19, as you would expect, has had an impact on the way in which the campaign is developed. One of the things which has been happening over recent years is discussion and negotiations between the nations of the world in arms control conferences at Geneva under the auspices of the United Nations. Those discussions have been proceeding very slowly, and obviously the COVID outbreak has had a severe impact and delayed them even further, which is disappointing. But what I think is far more important is that COVID-19 has shown us really how wrong we have got our focus on international security issues. The governments of the world, particularly governments like the United Kingdom, are spending unimaginable sums of money on nuclear weapons, high-tech automated weapons systems, artificial intelligence for the military. None of those systems are any use whatsoever in protecting us against fundamental threats like COVID-19. You know, the biggest threat, security threat that humanity has faced for a century. So what we think, Drone Wars, what we think we need to do is shift away from this tech focus, this focus which is not intended to protect ordinary people like you and I, but is in fact intended to protect the world's elites and their privileges and their ideologies and their financial interests, and instead refocus security on human security issues, things which affect us all, like climate change, the economy, COVID-19. These are the kind of issues which affect everybody, and we need to look at sustainable security in a more open way instead of taking an overtly military view of security. If humans are not fully in the loop in the control of a weapon system, that raises a number of issues. Basically, it means that the machine is making a decision on who to kill, and that is highly problematic for a number of reasons. There's the ethical issue that we've already discussed about can it be right to allow a machine to take a human's life? But there are also issues associated with the laws of wars. How is it possible for a machine to accurately discriminate between civilians and combatants? The problem with AI technology is that it's still at a very brittle stage. It can behave in ways that we don't necessarily understand. It can make mistakes. If it's placed in new situations, then it can behave in completely unexpected ways. So these all make it difficult to use killer robots, lethal autonomous weapon systems in a kind of military context to be absolutely sure that what is happening is what the commander wants to happen. So it's very important that we think all weapon systems are always under human control at any time, and that control has to be meaningful. It doesn't mean that there's one commander trying to sort of divide attention between half a dozen screens in a very fast-moving situation. It means that the commander has to have complete control over what's going on. There are laws of war which apply to all soldiers and everyone in the military. And to cut a long story short, they control what soldiers can legally do in war and the amount of force that they can legally use. And as you would expect, it's not okay for soldiers to sort of kill anybody. They have to take efforts to protect civilians. They're not allowed to deliberately kill civilians. They have to be discriminate in terms of protecting civilians and discriminating between them and the military. And they also have to be proportionate in the amount of force they use. So those laws of war apply to killer robots as well as every other military system. And again, as we've seen, there are questions about whether it would be possible for killer robots to be discriminate in the way in which they operate. I think another issue is if something goes wrong, then what happens then? How do we attribute responsibility for the problem? If a machine goes wrong and kills civilians, then you can't place the machine in front of a war crimes tribunal. But the commander can say, well, it wasn't my responsibility, I set it off, I didn't know what it was going to do. The developer can say, well, I didn't know what it was going to do, it wasn't used in the situation it was developed for. So there is scope for evading responsibility for potential human rights abuses, which is not a good thing in international law. So there are different types of autonomous weapon systems. I mean, automated weapon systems have been around for decades already. We're concerned about the most modern, the most dangerous types of lethal autonomous weapon systems which operate beyond human control. And for all the reasons that we've set out, we think that there should be an absolute ban on the development and the use of autonomous weapon systems that are not under meaningful human control. There also needs to be a ban on other systems, particularly, for example, anti-personnel weapons that are indiscriminate in their use and which are automated. There are other systems, like I said, which are already in use, like, for example, anti-aircraft systems, which are highly automated and which operate with very limited degrees of human control, with a lot of computer backup to operate them. And there are obviously risks associated with them. There have been a number of very terrible incidents whereby civilian airliners have been shot down by mistake by such systems. So we think whatever new instrument comes in to ban killer robots needs to be underpinned by a commitment to the existing laws of war, and also needs to be underpinned by a commitment to allow meaningful human control at all times. So our campaign is working at both levels, nationally and internationally. Internationally, we are working through the United Nations Arms Control Frameworks to try to secure a treaty, an international binding treaty, that would ban the use of killer robot systems which were not under meaningful human control. And we're working with sympathetic governments, we're working with the tech sector, we're working with allies in civil society to get that to happen. Here in the UK, we're doing similar. The UK government, unfortunately, its position is not helpful. It's undertaking research into the development of such systems. It has said that it believes the laws of war as they stand are adequate for controlling such weapon systems, which we disagree with. It's basically acting as a block to prevent any discussion and agreement on a new treaty that would ban these weapon systems. So we're working hard again with student groups and our allies in this country to try to prevent the development of killer robots and force the government to accept its responsibilities and support a ban at the international level. Okay, so there's a lot that people can do, particularly among the student audience, for example. The campaign to stop killer robots in the UK is just launching a student campaign focusing particularly on universities which have a track record of work in military technology, with the aim, firstly, of finding out what they're doing, and secondly, of working with the university authorities to try to limit such work and prevent the development of science and engineering techniques that would allow the development of killer robots. So what I would suggest that if you're a student and you're interested in this, that you do, is look up your campus United Nations Association group or your Amnesty International group, or if you have a Campaign Against Arms Trade group, look them up, find out what they're doing and work with them to write to the Vice-Chancellor to say, is the university doing any work in this area? And ask the university, and if necessary individual academics, to sign up to our pledge not to undertake work that would allow the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems. Likewise, we're also kind of encouraging people to contact their members of parliament to try to build a cross-party consensus against these weapon systems. And it's always very important to try to raise awareness with members of the public. There is still very limited understanding in a lot of people about what exactly artificial intelligence is, what it can do, how it will shape the future, and some of the less benign implications that this technology has for our future. I think the role of academics is pretty crucial here, because at the end of the day, it's individual researchers who develop the technology that allows all these things to be possible. So if you're a researcher working in these fields, then you absolutely have responsibility to think about the ethical issues and take measures to prevent technology being used in a way which you and the rest of society might not want to happen. And it's all very well looking at university ethical frameworks, but often the approach that's taken is a tick box approach. It's seen as a hoop that you have to jump through to get funding rather than being given any sort of serious consideration. So the underlying message here is, do think very carefully about the ethical implications. Think about what you would do if the technology is used in a way that you would not appreciate it being. Who is funding your work? Have you crossed the line already if you're receiving funding from an arms company? What do your friends and family, what would they think of the research that you're doing if you explained it to them? Would they think it's a good thing or a bad thing? And I think these are the things that differentiate a professional scientist or engineer who takes these things seriously from a scientist who doesn't take these things seriously, who frankly, in my opinion, is nothing more than a cowboy.